It's those that are really focused on building relationships of trust. In fact, I bet, David, if we went back and we listened to every single episode that you did, and someone, because I know you've asked this question before, I bet all of those we could bring back to the trustworthiness of that person.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Trust is, of course, it's one of, if not the first key pillar of successful leaders, isn't it? And good leadership. So,
we assess great leaders subconsciously based on their trustworthiness, and we assess great teams based on their trustworthiness.
Have you ever pondered why trust forms in the first place, or how it can be measured, why it is often seen as the very heart of leadership? Welcome to Leading with Integrity, and today we are diving into the second episode in our November mini-series, which is called The Heart of Leadership, a People-First Journey, where we're taking a closer look into the core elements that define exceptional leadership. I am David Hatch. Hello again. I'm your host, your navigator through this expedition. And in today's episode, we'll be unlocking the cheat code of leadership, trust. Okay, it's not a cheat code, I'll be honest, because there's no such thing for leaders. Sorry about that. But it's certainly an essential element of your leadership success. Concepts like trust, engagement, human connection, they are the day-to-day, the bread and butter of effective, great leadership. So joining us today is the remarkable Natalie Oldfield, a trust expert, also keynote speaker, author, trainer, and seasoned leader herself. Natalie brings a wealth of knowledge on how to build trust, how to engage authentically, and foster those genuine human connections in the world of leadership. So stay tuned as we journey through those intricate pathways of trust, unveiling some of the secrets behind measuring and understanding its dynamics. And we'll also explore the core behaviours that define exceptional leaders generally, but also in terms of their ability to build and maintain trust. So things like what to do, and perhaps more importantly, what to avoid. This is Leading with Integrity, Leadership Talk, the podcast for first-time managers who are working in tech-driven businesses and teams and who want to be more effective, people-first leaders. Each week, you will learn the crucial strategies, mindsets, and practical tips that successful modern leaders follow to be engaging, ethical, and authentic managers who get the best from their teams. And we'll achieve all of this via weekly conversations with leaders, with leadership experts, entrepreneurs, and business owners, people who have already walked this path and have some amazing insights to share, with an added sprinkling of occasional solo episodes and some group chats where we'll have multiple guests. My name is David Hatch, and I will be your host. And leadership has always been a passion for me. After a career spent in a series of small businesses during 15 years in the aerospace industry, 5 or 6 of those at the end of that career were in a space startup in the UK, so trying to launch satellites into orbit, very cool stuff. And through all of that experience, I learned that the secret to successful management is in the ability to apply great leadership. And in turn, the secret to great leadership, it's all about your integrity, putting people before profits.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Natalie, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, David.
And so we'll start the episode, I think, as I always do, completely handing the reins over to my guest to introduce yourself, tell the listeners a bit about your background, what you do today, and why you do it.
Okay, well, thank you. My name is Natalie Doyle Oldfield. I am the founder and president of a company called Success Through Trust. I work with business owners and leaders to help them build their companies. And I do that, David, by focusing on helping them build relationships of trust with their colleagues and their teams and their customers. And before I founded my company 10 years ago, I worked for many years in the technology industry in multiple types of roles, working with customers in marketing and in communications and product development. And I worked all over the world, primarily in Canada and the US. I also actually worked in London for a very short amount of time, and have always loved working with customers. And this is really what drew me to getting involved in trust. And sometimes people say to me, well, why trust? Why are you working with companies to help them build relationships of trust? And it all kind of started for me, David, years ago when I was working with a technology company, because I spent 25 years in that industry in different types of companies that I would say technology. And I was asked to take over sales. And I really didn't know how to do that. And I really believe that none of us want to be sold to. And we all just want to buy from someone we trust and get advice from people we trust. And I knew intuitively that this is the way it is. However, really wanted to know, how do you do that? So I actually went back to graduate school and did my master's in graduate research, went in to figure out how is it that in a business-to-business environment, customers decide to buy, and quickly found out that it's all about trust. It all comes down to trust. So that's a bit of backstory around me and my business. Now I work with companies all over the world, some of the world's best managed companies. I work with global companies. I work with companies that have maybe 10 employees and companies that have thousands of employees. And I do a lot of work in the technology industry, manufacturing companies, and IT. And I say technology, to me, someone that or a company that's in technology could be a team of scientists. It could be a team of people who are expert welders, or it could be a team of engineers or people who are bioscientists. It's a very broad term, I know, and I love what I do. And you ask the why. I really believe that at the end of the day, trust is a company's most critical asset, having the trust of your employees and of your customers. And I also believe that it's a person's most critical asset, and that we as individuals, if we're trusted, our careers take off and great things happen. I'm located in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, and I have 2 children. They're adults, young adults, and a husband. And, outside of work, I do love to golf. I'm working hard to be a better golfer. But I love that. And that's really who I am.
Well, thank you so much for a lovely introduction. And best of luck with the golf. I applaud the effort. It's not something I have the patience for myself.
Well, each day I try to get better and better. And, some days that happens, David. Some days I go backwards. But, it's fun to be out. And, we have some beautiful golf courses where I live. And there's also great golf courses all over the world. So it's good.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, it's certainly if you're doing business travel, it's probably quite difficult to find a conference that doesn't have a golf course nearby, isn't it?
Yeah, and I love to travel. So that's another hobby of mine. So
Well,
yeah, they work well together.
Lovely, yeah. the science of trust is something I find really interesting. It's one of these concepts, isn't it, that it can be quite sort of vague and ethereal almost, and also quite relative, and everyone will understand it in a different way.
Yeah.
So taking concepts like that and trying to understand the scientific elements behind it and what actually makes it function is really interesting to me. But I'd love to hear a bit more about what specifically drew you to it as well.
Well, as I mentioned, I went back to university and did graduate research in this area. And ultimately, what drew me to it is, like many of us, intuitively, we know what it feels like to be trusted. We know what it feels like when we trust someone, right? We have this comfort level, things happen quicker. We are more vulnerable. We share more information. And as you said, it's a big concept. And I really wanted to figure out how, because most leaders want to be trustworthy. Some of them just don't know how. And so this is why I went back to university and to answer this question. This is what I did my whole thesis on. And what I found after creating a proprietary framework and measurement tool is that we can actually build, manage, and protect trust and repair it, if you will. And there is a step-by-step process. And I got so interested in this that with my business hat on, I thought, okay, well, what we can manage, we must be able to measure, because my entire career, this is what was being said in boardrooms. And so I went about, while still doing my research, to create a diagnostic, an actual measurement tool to measure one's trustworthiness and a company's trustworthiness. So companies, as we know, David, are made up of people. So when we think about if we trust a company, we're actually thinking about the people in that company. And trust is about our cumulative interactions, how we communicate, how we behave, and how a company or how a person serves us. So there is a science behind it, and there's a step-by-step process. And then, I got so interested in it that while doing my research, like I said, I actually measured it and created this tool and tested it out with about 90,000 people over multiple industries, multiple years, to create a quantifiable score, which I call, it's a quantifiable score that measures a company's trustworthiness. I coined the term trust equity. I call it your trust equity score. And what's very interesting about that is that we can actually look at where the gaps are, where someone's strengths are, where someone's weaknesses are. And it's very exciting because, most leaders I talk to, do want to be more trustworthy. They want to be the most trusted leader. And a lot of leaders today know that trust is a leadership imperative. We hear this out there in the mainstream media that, leaders need to be trusted and they need to build more trust. However, a lot of them don't know how to do it.
Yeah, I mean, depending on where you look, I guess we're focusing on business, aren't we? But certainly you look in some of the political arenas, a lot of them are very good at losing it. But I think you're right. They're not so good at building it, presumably because they don't know how, which is a very, very good way of looking at it. Something else that I've always found really challenging about trust as an idea is this idea, and there's even a cliche sort of saying about it, isn't there, that once trust is lost, it's impossible to regain it.
Yes.
And I don't necessarily think that's true as much as I used to. But what I would be really curious to hear about is whether you've applied your trust measurement, some trust equity, to like a before and an after of when there's been some loss of trust, and then whether whether and how it can help people regain trust once lost.
Yes. So I have done that with clients, and I would agree with you. Once you lose it, you can never regain it. Not really sure I agree with that. And I do believe you can regain it. You know, what I would say, what I share with people is that you always want to be building your trust equity. You always want to be building the trust you have with someone, so that when and if you make a mistake, which most people do at some point, you have a balance, if you will, almost like a bank account to draw from. You have trust equity to draw from. So like you, I would agree that, you know, it takes a while to really lose someone's trust. Now, I should qualify that. Everyone's different, David. Some folks, I have one client who is a leader and primary managing partner of an engineering firm in Western Canada. And, you know, for him, if someone on his team does not tell the truth and they lie, it breaks trust and he's not able to get past it. I have other people that I work with that, you know, there are certain things that really trigger them and they don't trust. So everyone's different. However, what I would say is we can all have a bank account and build up, because with time and familiarity, we build trust. Because as I said, it's about the cumulative actions. I have worked with companies that have had challenges with trust, and we've measured the trust, and then we learn, okay, what did they do to lose it and how to rebuild it? And I'm thinking of one company I worked with a couple of years ago in 2021. This is a global company in the healthcare industry. They make equipment and diagnostics for hospitals and laboratories. And they felt that during the pandemic, they had lost trust with their customers. Now, they felt that, they didn't know that. And oftentimes we do feel. So this company saw what I would call indicators of low customer trust. Clients were ghosting them, not returning calls. Clients were not showing up for weekly meetings, project updates. They saw an increase in the number of complaints. They saw that sales were down. They saw that it was companies that they'd been working with for many years were now asking for a proposal and saying we're going to go to a request for proposal and an RFP process, versus how it used to be was sole sourced. You see, when you're a trusted advisor or you have high trust with a company, you often are not asked to compete for business with, you know, X number of people. So they saw all these indicators, and we did measure the trustworthiness. And what was really interesting is, so this was a global measurement. They had customers all over the world, and they did find in some geographical areas, they did have low customer trust, low trust equity, as I would say. And so once we did a segmentation analysis and looked at, okay, where is this happening? What type of customers? We did some training. As I mentioned in the intro, I do a lot of training and education, and I worked over several week period with the teams in those areas. And we focused on how to rebuild trust. And they started to see some increases in sales and decreases in the number of complaints and increases in the number of meetings that they've come to. So you can measure it and you can manage it. And we are we love working with companies that are so transparent, open, and honest, that want to see how they can improve with customers, because ultimately that's really why they wanted to measure. And that's one example. I've worked with other companies where a manufacturing company I'm thinking about that measures the trust of their customers, which are dealers and wholesalers and distributors, every other year, because it's a key performance indicator for them. So they have a benchmark and they want to make sure that they improve every single year.
It must be immensely complicated doing a project like that on a global scale. How do you account for local cultural differences in the way that, say, a big business is perceived? Because, I mean, that could have a massive impact on trust, couldn't it? And I guess the same question would apply if you were working for maybe a government agency, like even regional differences within a country. So how do you cater for that, I suppose, in the work that you do?
Well, every customer is different, right? And every business is different. So what I do when I work with companies, David, is I really work hard to understand what results they're trying to get. And it's a great question. And not only do I look for what results are they trying to get, but when I'm training someone, as an example, so I have a program that I call Trusted Advisor Certification. And when companies place leaders and managers and up and coming leaders in this program to learn how to build trust. I believe trust is a skill that we can learn. And as I mentioned, there's a step-by-step process. It's based on science. It's based on evidence, which means it's repeatable. And when you apply the principles of trust, you get these results. When people come in these programs that I do, I always meet with the leader, the business owner, the manager, to learn about what are the results you're looking for. So I have a one-on-one meeting. And what are the business objectives and what are the professional development objectives you have for that specific person? And sometimes it's, we want this person to have more confidence in a meeting. Other times it's we want this person to become more self-aware, to realize that the way that they're communicating is not helpful to the team. Sometimes it's, we have a new team leader and we want her to build a high performance team. So, I cater to the results the company's looking for. And then within that, then we look at what might be some differences, whether it's in a company or a region or with customers.
What I find quite interesting, going back again to the whole concept of trust, quite a few people over the years have probably worked for managers, I'm sure, who've taken a grim view of it. So kind of like, well, I don't really care whether you trust me. I'm the boss. I say do it, you do it. Mm-hmm. And with that kind of mentality, it can be quite difficult to demonstrate the value of trust. But also, I think for a business, there is a value to it. And so the question I have really is, what is the business case for trust? Why should managers, why should leaders care about building it with their people and with their customers?
Okay. Well, I love this question, David, because the business case is so strong. In fact, it's never been stronger. Worldwide, we all want to buy from companies we trust. In fact, 80% of people worldwide say they're more likely to buy from a company whose products and services and offerings they trust. In addition to that, 54% of people worldwide are going to pay more for a product and service they trust. So it affects customer retention, it affects customer sales, And there was a study done last year. It was a worldwide study done by the economists arm of their research arm, the Economist Impact. So they did a worldwide study on trust in business partnerships. And what they found, in addition to the statistics I just shared with you, is that 86% of people worldwide are more likely to work with or partner with a company that they trust. So the business case in terms of customers and partnerships is extremely high. It also drives referrals and recommendations. 68% of people worldwide refer a product or service they trust. And conversely, about 70% people worldwide are going to tell everyone they know when they don't trust someone. I mean, just think about your experience if you go to a restaurant or you have a bad experience with a company. You tell your friends and neighbors on the weekend, and then you tell your colleagues, you share it in the lunchroom or in the virtual lunchroom. We all do this. We do this on a regular basis. So the business case for us to build trust with customers and external stakeholders, extremely high. Internally, it couldn't be higher than it is today, David, because not only do people want to buy from companies they trust, we want to work for companies that have a social conscience, companies that do the right thing, companies that empower their employees. I recently read, and this is not a new statistic, this is from a couple of years ago, it was published in Harvard Business Review, 58% of people worldwide, when asked, don't trust their managers. And when I do presentations and conferences, I did this last week at a conference. I was doing a keynote presentation to a national organization of equipment and transportation business leaders and owners. And I asked everybody in the room to stand up if they trusted someone on their team. And everybody in the room stood up, every single person, which is great because trust is really the key ingredient to a high performance team. Then I said, okay, I want you to sit down if you trust everyone on your team. Well, no one sat down. So then I said, I want you to sit down if you don't trust your manager. And more than 50% sat down. And they were blown away, as I can see your facial expression. People leave they leave managers, they don't leave companies. And there's some very recent statistics that have come out that's saying that, trust is the number one reason why people leave companies, because they don't trust their manager. And as you know, I wrote a book called The Power of Trust, How Top Companies Build, Manage, and Protect It. And in that, I share a very seminal study that Google did in the mid 2000s, like 2015, I believe. And it was all around how do you create a high performance team? Well, the single most important ingredient to creating a high performance team is trust. So the business case could never be stronger because we want to retain our employees. It's really hard to get people right now. Right? We hear about the talent war. Well, not only is it difficult to retain talent, it's difficult to recruit talent. When you have high trust, you want to work there. When you have high trust, you want to stay there. And then you help recruit your friends and colleagues to a company. So the business case, I could go on and on about. I love that you asked that question, David.
Yeah, I mean, the statistics actually, the only one that really surprises me is actually how high the percentage is of people who do trust their managers. Because if you look at some of the other studies that have been done in the last few years, I mean, you look at stats on like staff engagement at work,
yes,
whether people are satisfied with their jobs, and then you compare that to studies about what has the most impact on those statistics, and
yes,
it's the manager in like 70+% of the cases, whereas the engagement figures, I mean, they're actually a lot worse in the UK than they are in the US and on your side of the Atlantic. But I think the average was something like only 20% of respondents said, I feel pretty engaged and satisfied with my job.
The biggest leadership skill, the imperative, is to learn how to build trust and to learn how to retain it and protect it with your team, David. So, because we can talk about building trust with clients and customers, which I would love to all day long, but really it starts inside a company with the team. So a lot of the workshops that I do really, since the pandemic, has really focused on how to build trust with a team first. Because this is where it all starts. And in the model that I built, that, like I said, is in my book, if anyone's interested in looking at more, it does start with having a culture of trust inside an organization. And then, of course, it's about having the capabilities, and then building trust outside is next. But it really comes down to the leader, the people on the team. You can have the best product in the world. You can have the most innovative product with the highest quality and the best price, and the most advanced distribution system and the best tools and the best technologies. But at the end of the day, if you don't have a team of people that are communicating, behaving, and serving in a trustworthy way, you don't have anything, because we are not going to buy from a company, which is a big statement, but it's true. It actually all comes down to the people. Reality is, the people are the most critical trust risk point any company has. Now, the good news with that is we can actually manage that. We can actually manage that, and you can actually learn how to build trust. And as I shared with you, people can learn. I've seen transformations with technical folks and operational folks and business development, customer service folks, that they learn to become self-aware, and they learn to communicate in a trustworthy way, and they learn to behave with integrity and ethics.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think trust is central to so many things in business. I mean, definitely to leadership. I quite often say, no one's going to follow a leader they don't trust, because why would you? They might be leading you off a cliff for all you know. So you've got to have some trust in them before you're going to go after them.
Yeah.
And I think, the whole point around people first, and again, I always come back to, the customers are very important. You don't have a business without your customers. But who is it that's looking after those customers? Who's providing them the service? Who's building trust in your business with them? It's not going to be the business owner. It's not going to be the corporate head office, is it? It's the people. It's the customer service reps. It's the sales people. It's the tech support. It's all the people who are directly interfacing, communicating with your customers. So if you don't, I agree with you. If you don't start with your own people, if you don't start internally, if you don't have that trust culture, if you don't have that effective, trustworthy leadership, then the customer becomes a moot point anyway, doesn't it? Because they're going to leave.
Well, you won't have them. Yeah. And so to your point, it is about the people. And, when sometimes people ask me, who's responsible for building trust? Who's the responsible? Should a company have a chief trust officer? Well, some companies do. However, it starts with the leadership team. But as you said, it's really about the frontline people who are operationalizing it and executing on it. Yes, it starts with the leadership team. However, it needs to cascade throughout the entire organization. I liken it often, David, to having a culture of safety in a company. When you have a culture of safety, we know that it's important. It's a cultural value. And we have safety meetings, and people pay attention. And if a mistake is made, or if there's an incident, we correct it and focus on it. And we talk about it on a regular basis in Toolbox Tuesdays or Toolbox Thursdays, or, we have conversations about it. the clients that I work with that actually invest in their people and invest in building relationships of trust, not only with their colleagues, but with their customers and stakeholders, they see it as a value too, like safety in the workplace. They invest in making sure that everyone has the vocabulary and is able to talk about it and is assessing it on a regular basis and making sure that every action and every communication and the way they serve is all about building a relationship of trust. And it's like I said, it's about these cumulative actions.
I like that comparison. It's a good one. And I think particularly because there's some pretty high profile examples of a safety culture gone wrong, aren't there, in recent years? We won't mention any names. They're probably still a bit embarrassed. But it does go to show it's such a clear comparison, isn't it? Same with trust. Yeah. So if your culture of trust falls down, it's going to probably do just as much damage to your reputation 100%. In the market, isn't it? As if your safety culture failed and you had, I don't know, let's say a high profile aircraft crash. So I do really like that. And I think something that I also find quite interesting, going back to what you were saying a bit earlier about the way customers respond to it. And it makes me think again of the customer feedback loop. And
yes,
people are, I think, a lot more likely to give bad feedback if they've had a bad experience than the opposite.
Of course. Or
yes,
they don't give any feedback at all, David.
Well, yes. I think the threshold for giving good feedback is a lot higher, isn't it, than bad feedback? Like you could have just one little bit goes wrong with your order at the cafe or something, and you're probably going to complain. Whereas if they got everything right and gave you some free stuff, you almost certainly won't give them excellent feedback. You'll just, as you say, give no feedback, pay and leave.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder, like, how much do they have to do before you're going to say, thank you so much. That was a great cup of coffee. I had an amazing experience. Here's an extra tip or something. Yeah. And it is an interesting one. It's a human behavior, isn't it?
It is. And it goes back to what trust have you built up along the way, right? So as you know, so in my framework and the model that I teach folks, there are 8 principles of trust that I have created that have been tested out based on science and evidence, that when we apply these, you build not only your trustworthiness, but they also directly correlate with referrals, new business, satisfaction, loyalty. And it's about being deliberate and intentional. So when we're deliberate and intentional about building trust, if we make a mistake, if a delivery doesn't show up on time, or we're 10 minutes late for a call, or we get on the Zoom call or Teams call or a Google Meet and we say, we're kind of in a bad mood and our behavior is not as consistent. We have some slack. We give people some slack because we know that's not how they typically are. So it's all about having a relationship.
This is maybe a related question given what we're discussing right now. So if you had to choose one feature that you would most associate with successful leadership, what do you think that would be? I think I know the answer, hence asking at this particular moment.
Wow, what a great question. You had mentioned before our call that you might ask that, and I really have thought about it, that as it relates to what we're talking about here, it's really when a leader does the right thing, even when it's challenging, and they're transparent, David. Like, transparency builds trust. We know this. We all want the truth, whether it's good or bad. We all want to have information shared with us that is important to us. And when a leader does the right thing, even when it's tough, and shows their integrity and that they're acting in the best interest of others, that is really how a leader can build trust. And if he or she does that deliberately, intentionally over time, right? It's about the accumulation over time. When and if they make a mistake, whether it's, a poor cup of coffee or, not share an important piece of news that they, forgot or slipped their mind, then we give them grace, if you will.
The example that always sticks in my head from past experiences, and you mentioned showing up 10 minutes late to a call, and then with also what you just said there about giving people some grace, do you think there is, or what relationship there is between trust and time? And what I mean by that in the sense of, so let's say I've been working for someone for a couple of weeks. They show up late to a call once or twice. Maybe I'm weird, but I'm more likely to give them the benefit of the doubt at that point.
Yes.
If I've got a much longer relationship with them, I've been working with them, say, a few years.
Yeah.
Or, in a lot of respects, you'd think, okay, well, the longer you've worked with someone, the more you're going to trust them. But then at the same time, if they've showed up late consistently for quite a few calls, I'm probably going to trust them a lot less. And I don't know, it feels like an interesting dynamic in there somewhere, but what are your thoughts?
There is a relationship of trust and time on multiple levels. So I might trust you today. However, 10 years down the road, if there's been no interaction, the trust is different. So I will say that. I would also say that if someone shows up 10 minutes late all the time, well, we know that behavior is predictable and reliable. And now we know that. So.
True. Yeah.
And, as a leader, as a manager, if that bothers us, I would suggest that, we should manage expectations and share with that person, time is really important to me. You're sending off signals that you're not respecting my time, if that's how you feel, or that this is an important topic, or you can always be late for me. So I would have an upfront, clear conversation. In some cultures, perhaps time isn't that important. And in some people, perhaps time isn't that important. It's an interesting one, David. I have a sister who really time is important to her. And I've thought about this so much over the years as to why is it so important to her? Well, her husband was in the military, in the reserves. And in that environment, it's very important. In other environments, in other businesses, it may not be a value. So it's what we value. So it's a wonderful question, and it's multidimensional.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, of course. If it becomes a pattern, then you're expecting it, and you can almost trust the pattern, as it were, can't you? It's a different form of trust, maybe. But the other thing I massively agree with as well is say something if it bothers you.
Of course.
Because if you don't say anything, nothing will change.
Yeah. So when I do workshops with companies, here's an interesting example for you. So when I do workshops with companies, sometimes I do keynote presentations, as I've mentioned, but sometimes a company will say, okay, I would like you to come in and talk to all our folks so everybody has a similar vocabulary. And like safety, everyone is focused on trust. So I did that last week with a company. So technical company, they create software that factories use to have more efficiencies with their machines. And they wanted everybody on the team, the sales engineers, the software developers, the professional engineers, the project managers, to really have an understanding of how to build trust and an awareness of trustworthy characteristics and how to become more trustworthy. So we did this presentation. I did a workshop with the whole team. And one of the things I asked was, let's talk about what destroys trust for you. What are some things that happen that destroy trust for you. And several folks said being late, but some folks, when we had that conversation, said, well, what you just said, well, it's okay to be late. I know you're always late. That's consistent, predictable, and reliable. Well, that's one of the principles of trust, David, is to be consistent, predictable, and reliable in everything you do. Because when we're consistent, predictable, and reliable, whether it's sharing our email signature or in our behavior and how we show up, that reduces risk. So we know what's going to happen, because none of us like surprises. So it's a very interesting question.
I like it as well, particularly if we're talking about it in the context of people turning up late. I think on the one hand, it feels pretty low stakes, doesn't it? But at the same time, it's quite useful as an example because everyone can relate to it. Everyone has someone in their life who's always late.
Yes. And it's what value do we place on it? And so as a leader, we need to share that it's an important value for us.
Yes, indeed. And I think in the workplace context,
yes.
I mean, for me, I was always one of those people who got annoyed if other people showed up late. And I think the difference of the dynamic as well. So if it's the leader is the one who's showing up late, I think for me, that's where it tips over the line of becoming less acceptable behavior. And I think that partly is because it's less about the time. It's less about whether they're there or not for the meeting, although, of course, that is important. It's about showing respect for people's time, as you said. And that's the part of it, because actually, ultimately, it doesn't matter really, does it? It's not going to affect things in the grand scheme if someone's 10 minutes late for a meeting, or they might have had a car accident, they might have missed the bus. Anything could have happened that means it's not their fault. Yes. But I think when it's a consistent pattern, if you are the leader in that situation, you have to be there first, in my opinion.
Yeah, you're bringing back a very strong memory. I as I mentioned, I have this program called Trusted Advisor, and a leader was placed in the program because the business owner said, this is a senior vice president, and we're having a lot of trust issues with him on his team. And he's a great guy, and he was, and highly technical professional engineer. Very successful in his career, moving up because he is so technical and knew his skill set. However, we're having some turnover in the team. That was an indicator of low trust. We've had a number of people go to HR, and we believe that he just never learned these soft skills in university. So he came into the Trusted Advisor program, and I worked with him. In this case, it was a group program that I did. There were people from a variety of different companies. I do this for companies, like I told you, but I also have a group program called Trusted Advisor Certification. And it all happens on Zoom virtually. And day one, he showed up and everybody was introducing themselves. And we were talking about what builds trust and words to describe trust. And he was late. Now, as we know, now that we're online a lot, we all know, we look in the top right-hand corner and say, oh, look at the time. It's 2:32. He's 2 minutes late. We're much more aware online. And in some ways, folks are more or less forgiving, if you will, than they were 5 years ago, David, because they're a bit grumpier and they're more skeptical, and there are a bit more challenges than there are in the workplace. So I noticed that. And then what happened with this gentleman is he just was not aware. It's a big part of the program and what I teach is that we have to become aware, self-aware of how and what we're doing is affecting other folks. And over several weeks in this program, he learned that the way that he was communicating was abrasive, that the way that he was talking about himself all the time and everything he did was not building trust with other folks. And he learned that with the folks on his team, where he works and lives, it's a sign of disrespect to be late all the time. So he had a transformation throughout this, because what happened was he realized, oh, I had no idea, because he actually wakes up very happy, very excited, really enjoys his team, and he's a sincere person. However, he was communicating and behaving in a distrusting way. So we can have all this knowledge and understanding of something, but really it's about changing your behavior to get different results. And so the transformation this gentleman had, to save his anonymity, I'll call him Gordon. By the end of the program, his manager called me, the CEO, and said, what happened to him? He's had a complete transformation. Well, he made some tweaks. He learned the skills to be a trusted leader. He just didn't know. And so for him, those were the transformations. One of the things that I've learned is that a lot of times people are just not aware, David. They're not aware of how the way they communicate and the way they behave is affecting other people. They just do not know. They don't have self-awareness. And when you become aware and you learn how to make some tweaks, or you get a few new tools, if you will. So we gave him some tools. It can change everything.
Yeah, I mean, self-awareness is another central aspect, isn't it, to good leadership? But it's also something I think that can be quite difficult, particularly in situations like that. Because even if you're self-aware enough to ask, or to ask your people, because of that leader-employee relationship or dynamic, many people may not feel comfortable telling the truth to the boss at that point. So they might not want to say, well, yeah, you're always late and it annoys me. Could you stop doing that? A lot of people would never say that to their boss. No. So even when you get to that point, you'll be like, oh, I might be the problem, I should ask. It still might not work. You still might not get the right answer.
Yeah.
So it is a difficult one.
It is difficult. And, luckily for him, because now he's got a very successful career, and they were really concerned that his company invested in him. And, they wanted to retain him. It's difficult to find people. They wanted to retain everyone on the team. But if your leader is not trusted, people won't stay on the team. Going back to the business case for investing in trust, it's retaining your key employees.
Yes, absolutely. So this next question, I think we've already talked about one of these really, which was about trust being lost and never being regained. So I think that's one pretty big misconception about what trust is and how it works.
Yes.
What would you say are some of the other common misconceptions around it?
That it happens quickly. For some folks, based on what their experience is, what the culture is in their company, it doesn't happen that quickly. Sometimes it can take years to develop. I think that's a misconception. I think the other misconception is that it's all on the leader to build trust. Trust is two-way. It's a mutual relationship. And in order for me to trust you, I have to extend trust first. And I think that's a big misconception, is that it's all on the leader or all on the other person or the company to build trust with the customer. It's two-way.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. It's the same story with respect, isn't it, in a lot of ways, in communication, and well, we could pick half a dozen other leadership behaviors, couldn't we? And it's a lot of it is very much two-way. I actually quite like that about trust, because it gives you quite a good opening, doesn't it? You can demonstrate trust in the person you want to trust you. And that's a good way of starting that off, I find. Something else I think I'm going to ask you, because it's quite interesting to me. Do you think building trust has got more difficult in the COVID era?
I do think it's gotten more difficult. because I believe that people are more skeptical and more critical and grumpier than ever before. However, there is a step-by-step process, and you can learn to build trust. And when you focus on it, you will get results, David. When you invest in it, you'll get results. And, one of the things we were talking about before we get started here is, what leadership lessons have I learned in life? Well, I've learned a lot of things, and I continue to learn every day. And it's one of the big things I love about my work is that I get to work with companies and people all over the world so that, I'm always learning from them. The single biggest lesson I've learned is that trust really is the most critical asset we all have, and having relationships of trust. So I want to qualify that. So yes, sometimes, we use the word trust, but it's really around building relationships of trust. And I think that, as I mentioned, if I had to choose one thing that associates someone with a successful leader, it's that the leader's trusted and they do the right thing every single time, even when it is challenging or difficult. And let's face it, for leaders, it's been challenging and difficult over the last few years, and things have changed. However, when you apply the principles of trust in each and every interaction, you will build trust. So the way to do it hasn't changed. There are nuances.
And what's the best piece of advice that you can give to a new manager who is struggling to build trust within their team?
One piece of advice that I would give a new manager or a new leader who's struggling to build trust with their team is to really focus on listening carefully to their team and really focus on being sincerely curious and being interested in learning from their team and learning from the people they work with versus being interesting, and to really focus on the other person, to focus on learning as much as you can from them and really stepping into their situation, being as empathetic as you can be. See, empathy is really about understanding someone else's situation and at its core. And so when you're really focused on being sincerely curious and authentic with them and being truly interested in what they're saying, that's a way for a manager or a leader in today's environment to build trust with their team.
Yeah, fair enough. So I think what I also find quite important for leaders to remember in these kind of situations, particularly when you're going through a massive external change that nobody has any control over, such as COVID, is that the people you're working with, humans are pretty good lie detectors.
Oh, yes.
So if things aren't going particularly well, or if they're going really well, and for some reason you're not telling them, they will know straight away something's not quite right. Just like they'll know if you're sat in a meeting with them and they're trying to explain something or communicate to you and you're not listening, they will know that as well. Yeah. Usually it's because it's dead obvious because you're sitting there playing on your BlackBerry or something. But there's other cues on there, like the eyes glazing over or staring out the window or into the distance and not paying attention, and then the follow-up questions totally irrelevant to what you just said, and it's all these kind of things, isn't it? But that's the sort of thing I think to bear in mind, especially so when your business is going through a difficult time.
100%.
Because people will be like hyper attuned to that sort of stuff because they're already so stressed about everything else that's going on. I guess that would be what I would say is one of the bigger changes of the last few years. And what do you think is the biggest mistake that a leader can make?
When you say we have like almost like lie detectors, I agree 100%, David. I mean, we have what I might call spidey senses, right? We know when someone's right? We know when someone's not telling the truth or the whole truth, or they're leaving something out. And that's a big mistake I would suggest that leaders make, is not being transparent, not sharing the whole truth. Now, of course, I know sometimes we can't share the whole truth because there's a conflict of interest, or it's an employee specific information that's confidential. But I'm suggesting that share the truth and be as transparent as you can be in that situation.
Absolutely agree. Yes. And I'd go one further and tell them that you can't tell them, and say why. Because people, if they know you're withholding, they want to know why. And if you've got a good reason, which, as you say, I mean, there's plenty of circumstances where you may not even be allowed to, whether you want to or not. Just say that. Say that. Don't make it a big secret out of nothing. Yeah, really frustrates me, that one.
It does. And so then the other thing that I find is, and again, I have someone in the Trusted Advisor program right now, and his manager placed him in the program because they believe that he is dishonest and, just not lying outwardly, but not sharing important truths and being vague. So that's another one, David, is being vague. So as an example, on a Monday morning after everyone's had, a weekend, people will say, well, how was your weekend? And some people might say great. Some people might say good. And then if you ask a follow-up question, which we humans often do, what did you do, or what you get up to? Did you go to the football game? What happened? This person is so vague. And then, everybody might be talking about the football game, and this person just sits there and doesn't say anything. And then people find out 2 weeks later that he just went to, a professional game. So he intentionally leaves things out. Well, that destroys trust on the team. Just like if a leader intentionally leaves things out, decides, because it's a choice, building trust is a choice, decides to not share that destroys trust. And then people don't feel safe sharing things that are happening to them. So it's a big topic, and clearly you and I could talk about it all day long. It is a leadership imperative. And when you learn how to become a more trustworthy leader, and you learn how to apply these principles and practices, employees want to be on your team. They want to stay with you. They're more innovative. It also affects innovation. Products get out quicker. And then as a result, customers are happier. They buy more. They tell their friends. They recommend. And they renew contracts.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's lies of omission, isn't it? Is what you're talking about a lot there. And I think, it's a bit unrelated, but you mentioned about feeling safe and the innovation aspects of it. Brought into my mind there at random. But another one of my pet peeves, as I call them, is this phrase, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions.
Yes.
And it's just so corrosive to the culture of a team and to trust in a leader if they say that. Because, first of all, as a leader, you want people to bring you the problems. You have to know about the problems, right? Because otherwise you can't make sure the team is going to solve them. You can't get the right output or the right result. But second of all, what does that say about how much you trust people, how much kind of latitude or empowerment or autonomy you're giving them to fail, if you don't want to hear when things have gone wrong?
Yeah. You're not very open.
Yeah,
you're not very open.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's kind of a tangent to trust, but I think it's related.
I think it's very related, right? Principle number 1 in my framework is listen carefully with empathy and compassion question and involve others in a conversation. And as I said, it's mutual. Trust is mutual. If I don't understand what's on your mind and what your challenges are, how can I build trust with you?
Exactly.
It all starts with listening and carefully understanding.
Leadership Heroes.
Right, I've only got one more question for you, and this is potentially the most difficult, but it's also my favourite, so you can't escape it, I'm afraid.
Okay.
The question is called Leadership Heroes, and it is, if you had to pick one person, and they can be anyone you like, alive, dead, past, present, real, fictitious, who in your opinion would perfectly embody leadership, who would that person be and why?
That's a difficult question.
It is, yeah, intentionally so.
It's a difficult question. I'm thinking, who might your audience know? So there's so many leaders, David, and many of us meet these people in our everyday lives and work with them in our everyday lives. So, I could say someone famous that everybody knows, but I think that maybe I'll choose someone that is, I guess, a leader in her personal life and in her professional life. And so I would say a woman I know here in Canada. She's based in Toronto. Her name's Heather Talk, and she is president of commercial and public sector for TELUS. So TELUS is a global publicly traded company. They primarily do business in Canada. It's one of the largest telecommunications companies. And I met her several years ago. She was a client. When I started my business and I was doing my research, I actually wrote about her as a trusted leader in my book, The Power of Trust, How Top Companies Build, Manage, and Protect It. So I would choose her because she embodies and practices the principles of trust. And she has always done that in all of the roles that I've known her in. And she is very much focused on acting in the customers or the stakeholders or the team's best interest. And she always does the right thing, even when it's challenging or difficult. And I think that's what embodies the most trusted leader. And she's consistent, she's predictable, and she's reliable. And that is important. Another principle of trust, and is committed to doing the right thing and acting in the best interests of whoever it is that she's serving, and committed consistently. And actually, I could go on and on. She would be a person. And she's a trusted leader, Heather Talk.
Clear to see that she's very much your leadership hero. So I think that's a very good pick. Yeah.
I have lots of leadership heroes. There are so many. It's very difficult to choose. There are so many.
Yeah, I know, but I have to put a cap on it because otherwise it will double the episode length every time I ask the question.
I know. It's great, you know what? It's a great question. I mean, I might also, there's so many people I might choose, but I'll put a cap on it.
Okay, well, lovely. I like the rationale behind it as well, and it makes a lot of sense as well, given what you do and what you're interested in. So, excellent choice. Thank you very much for sharing. I obviously don't know her, so I can't make any other comment than that. But
every team has a leadership hero, and it's those that are really focused on building relationships of trust. In fact, I bet, David, if we went back and we listened to every single episode that you did, and someone, because I know you've asked this question before, I bet all of those we could bring back to the trustworthiness of that person.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Trust is, of course, it's one of, if not the first key pillar of of successful leaders, isn't it? And
It
good
is.
leadership. So
We assess great leaders subconsciously based on their trustworthiness. And, we assess great teams based on their trustworthiness. And in fact, one thing I should mention for your listeners, David, is that I actually have a team trust assessment on my website that people are welcome to download. It's complimentary, that looks at the trustworthiness of the team and how the customers might view them. So, I encourage people to go to successthroughtrust.com and download that assessment. It's on my homepage. Like a pop-up will come up, and because I know that's subconsciously what we're all asking. Can I trust you?
yeah, and well, thank you for sharing that. I'll make sure that link goes in the episode description as well. So listeners, you can all find that easily. And I think we're about out of time because I'm conscious that you have a busy rest of your day ahead. So I don't want to take up too much more of your time. Only thing left for me to say, really, Natalie, is thank you so much for speaking with me today. It's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. And I'm sure the listeners have learned a lot about trust.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been great, David. Loved all your questions. Very insightful. And have a great day.
Thank you so much. You as well. Well, what a great conversation. Loads of insights into how trust works in that episode. And as we wrap it up, remember that the heart of leadership beats with trust, engagement, and human connection. If Natalie's expertise and experiences today were interesting and useful for you, be sure to explore more of her expertise. You'll find all the links and websites to do so in the episode description. Natalie, thank you for sharing your wisdom and insight with us today. It was a really enjoyable conversation for me, and I'm sure for our listeners as well. To our listeners, I've said it before, I'll say it again. Your support fuels this journey we're on together with this podcast. Your reviews are genuinely lighting our way forward, so keep them coming, and we will keep delivering great conversations about leadership in return. Don't forget to continue with our The Heart of Leadership, a People First Journey series. And to do so, join us next week for more profound leadership thoughts and observations, this time from our next guest, a business turnaround expert called Adrian Knight. And he has some very unique perspectives, having worked through and acquired and turned around quite a few businesses over the years. He's had quite an interesting exposure to different leadership approaches and seen quite a few of the big pitfalls that small business owners and new managers tend to make. So I'm looking forward to that one. And until then, all that's left for me to say is thank you for listening. Keep building that ever important trust with your teammates. Take care of yourselves and be a leader, not a boss.